Oprah by Kitty Kelley. Now, this book was a revelation for me. Not so much about Oprah's childhood or young adulthood or all the supposed scandals or the use of drugs or the allegations of her relationships being not what they seem with other people, all those sorts of things. That was all a little ho-hum because it's all been covered before in extensive detail. But one thing I was really interested to see was behind the scenes of her show. I mean, in particular, behind the scenes of Oprah Winfrey's book club, because that had a major impact on me. It was around that time when I was a young adult working in bookstores. And, you know, pretty much I knew that anything that Oprah Winfrey recommended in her book club, we had to get at the front of the shop pretty quickly. And we had to order in extra copies because it would be sold out very, very quickly. I still remember the pallets of books arriving with the Oprah Winfrey Book Club sticker on them. And, you know, it was exciting times. It was exciting times for authors, particularly for publishers, and even for humble little booksellers. You might remember Jonathan Franzen in the early 2000s and how he was a little bit snobby about his selection for corrections in the Oprah Winfrey Book Club, and he actually ruined his chances of being featured on the show. And it's funny because he blamed that on a lack of media training, but I think he needs to be held accountable for actually being his own worst enemy and self-sabotaging, because what he said was pretty snobby and, you know, elitist, and I can completely understand her reaction. It's like, well, you then, because, you know, I would have given your books millions and millions of sales. As it turns out, corrections didn't need any help selling, and probably actually being rebuffed ended up in more sales. And they ended up best of friends many years later because he was actually featured for his book, Freedom. But I'm going to read you just a little excerpt from that time, and then I'm going to go on to another scandal with an author with the initials of JF. So when Jonathan Franzen first heard that Oprah Winfrey was possibly selecting his book corrections, he said he considered turning down the invitation to appear on the show because, and this is a direct quote, "I see this as my book, my creation, and I don't want that logo of corporate ownership on it." I completely understand that too. I guess, you see, authors, their books are their babies. And I suppose to Jonathan Franzen it was like having Oprah Winfrey Book Club stamped on the forehead of his child. And so I can understand that sentiment. But, you know, the promise of cold, hard cash and worldwide domination probably would have swayed me. So Franzen followed up these comments with an appearance on National Public Radio where he talked about the split between high art literary tradition and entertaining books. So there's that sort of patronising, sort of snobbish elite attitude coming out at that point. Might be valid, but, you know, it's not something you want to bandy about if you have a hope to promote your books in the millions of copies. At an interview at an Oregon bookstore where he said that Winfrey had picked enough schmaltzy, one-dimensional books that I cringe myself, even though I think she's really smart and she's really fighting the good fight. So he did try to qualify it, but it was quite brutal, really, quite a brutal takedown. Now, as a subsequent reaction to that, the invitation to appear on Oprah Winfrey's popular daytime television show was withdrawn. And the host explained in a statement that he would not be appearing, and this is a direct quote from Oprah at the time, because he is seemingly uncomfortable and conflicted about being chosen as a book club selection, she said. "It is never my intention to make anyone uncomfortable or cause anyone conflict." which of course is hilarious because prior to her, starting up the Oprah Winfrey Book Club, you can see that she was all about making people feel uncomfortable. She was all about creating conflict. She was all about making her producers and staff and guests on the show signing these watertight NDAs that lasted their whole lifetime, so that if they were made to feel even slightly uncomfortable or even slightly conflicted, that they wouldn't be able to say a word. Now, one of the most insightful areas was seeing just how ruthless the producers for the Oprah Winfrey Show could be. Now, that can't necessarily be landed at Oprah's feet. I mean, she was the on-air talent. She was having to do her part, her role, and it is the producer's part to, follow the stories, get the background to the stories, line up the guests, do back checking on all the guests, all that sort of thing. So it was in particular the producer's sort of ruthless attitude to get these stories. It's basically, if you're going to be a guest back then on the Oprah Winfrey Show, you pretty much had to hand over your life, your entire life to these producers. You had to become their person for at least a month leading up to the show. And they were quite strong, quite authoritarian about it. And a lot of guests, it really freaked them out and it made them regret sort of agreeing to be a part of it. In particular, too, that sometimes by the time you actually got to the show and got onto the show, then often the experience wasn't very pleasant. Often you were sort of had questions thrown at you that you didn't expect. You were caught off guard. The angle of the show might be sort of different to what you expected, and you might feel embarrassed. And it was all in the name of good television. Now, as we know, that television is a ruthless business. And after reading this book, I wouldn't say that Oprah was ruthlessly ambitious, but I would say that she was determinedly ambitious. And she was very clear-eyed exactly where she wanted to go, what she wanted to achieve, and just how rich she wanted to become. One particular moving moment was after September 11, and they were actually following the family of a first responder that died in that awful crime. And so this family had to provide, particularly his widow, had to provide a lot of detail to the producers. They were calling her all the time. Now, you can imagine how awful that was because she was trying to grieve, but she was willing. She was willing to go on the show. She thought it would be a wonderful tribute to those that were lost, and in particular, I guess, a wonderful tribute to mark the life of her husband. So she was trying to cooperate as much as she could, but you could imagine the stress and how hard that was. So in the middle of grieving and trying to organise a private memorial for her husband, she was having to provide things, intimate things like wedding videos and photographs and background and birth certificates and, all sorts of things to these producers. And I just think, she must have felt like throwing up her hands and saying, it's all too much. I can't do it anymore. This is, too much for me. But she went along with it, did all the hard yards, really tried to cooperate, was extremely brave. But she drew the line at a camera crew actually being present at the memorial for her husband. She said an emphatic no. That had to be a moment that she could grieve in private and that her family could grieve in private. And so she provided all this context, provided all this material, gone out of her way to push her grief aside. But because she wouldn't allow them access to that private memorial, show was axed, story was killed. So she'd gone through all that effort, and then it never even went to air because she denied them access to the memorial. And that sort of broke my heart a little bit. It really did. It just seemed like all too much for absolutely no payoff whatsoever. Now, it's also really interesting that everyone that Oprah dealt with around that time, I don't know whether it's the same now, I presume it is, but they had to sign these watertight NDAs. I mean, everyone that worked for her, you know, whether it was like someone that worked for her at a private home or the gardener or someone that worked on the show or producers, they had to sign these watertight NDAs. And it's interesting that a point is made in the book that when she was asked about these watertight NDAs that she makes everyone sign, she said it's a question of trust. And you can understand that because she has been betrayed so much throughout her life, and from people that are really close to her and from people that really she should have been able to trust. But the author points out that really that's not a trust issue, it's a distrust issue. And it makes you wonder whether she was actually the instructor or the teacher or the mentor for Harry and Meghan's sort of attitude to dealing with the public. And, you know, in their dealings for Archwell and things like that, where we've just recently heard that, you know, there was a gag order had to be signed by that school in Harlem to do with the appearance for the bench, you know, the publicity appearance for the bench. Although it was couched as a humanitarian visit, it was really a publicity. But that's my personal opinion. Personal opinion. I'm not alleging that's true. But in my opinion, it was a publicity tour for the book The Bench. And those poor children were forced to sit on these new cushions and new carpet in order to listen to Meghan's very meaningful community art project, which was actually just a read aloud of her book. So we'll get on to James Frey, and you might remember all the fracas about his book, A Million Little Pieces, because it was said that he lied because it was presented as a memoir of his sort of drug addiction and his very fraught life and his life of being incarcerated and everything. And it turns out that it was wildly exaggerated and it was mocked as a consequence. And there was lots of expose articles written about it, and unfortunately, Oprah had actually promoted his book as part of her book club. So when all this started to come out, she took it personally. So she encouraged James Frey to actually go on the Larry King show with his mum. She said that she would listen in, she would evaluate the defence he was presenting to Larry King, and if she thought that it was good enough, then she would ring in at the end of the show and give him her endorsement. Now, I'm just going to read you a little bit about that in Kitty Kelley's book, Oprah. So when he went on Larry King's, he actually pleaded a subjective memory due to drug use. So he said due to his drug addiction, he acknowledged that he had, and this is a direct quote from the interview with Larry King, changed some things. Yeah, he did in the book. Mind you, it was a brilliant book. It was a brilliant book. It was, to me, it was a creative work that drew on real life experience. Now, if he had have couched that, if he had have couched the book in those terms, if the publishers had have couched the book in those terms, they would have been fine. A creative work that drew on real life experience. It's like when you see a movie that this movie is based on, you know, a real life story, but any resemblance to any person living or dead. You know the spiel that used to be on a lot of TV movies in our day. It's pure coincidence. That disclaimer at the start of a movie, they probably should have just done a disclaimer. He would not admit to any lies or distortions. King pointed out that while Frey had the support of his publisher, he had yet to hear from Oprah. Then one of Larry King's callers actually rang in and said, "Do you think she'll support you?" By the end of the hour, this is a direct quote from the book, there was still no call from Oprah, and Frey looked like a whipped dog with his mother close to tears. Just as Larry was about to turn to the next hour, handing it over to Anderson Cooper, he announced, "I'm going to hold the show a little longer because I understand we have Oprah on the phone. Let's hear what she has to say." So this was dramatic stuff. I wanted to say, because everyone's been asking me to release a statement, I just wanted to hear what James had to say. And then Larry King says, so she prattles on a bit of word salad, and she says, "It's still an Oprah recommend, right?" said Larry King. And Oprah uttered the fateful words for her, "Well, I certainly do recommend it for all." Well, another 6 weeks of uproar, scandal, the New York Times, and they came after Oprah herself. Now, all of this could have been avoided if her producers had have done a good job on this particular guest, because evidently they really didn't do any background on him at all. Now, subsequent to this, they did a lot of background on all Oprah Book Club members from then on. All the authors that were ever touted to be a part of the book club were just gone over with a fine-tooth comb from that point. Now, so Oprah was suffering a lot of hits. They were coming after her. She was extremely embarrassed and humiliated. Now, you don't want to embarrass and humiliate Oprah, because then when she invites you on her show, well, let's put it this way. James Frey actually asked if there was a gun out the back in a break in the show they recorded about the controversy. He said, "Is there a gun out the back? Because if there is, I'll just shoot myself now." And that was genuinely how he had felt when it was nearing the end of the hour, being in the hot seat at this Oprah Winfrey recording. So there's a really interesting sort of sentence in the book, which I think sort of sums it up. "With barely controlled rage," Oprah continued, "I have been really embarrassed by this, and more importantly, feel that I acted in defense of you. And you know, as I said, my judgment was clouded because so many people seem to have gotten so much out of this book. But now I feel that you conned us all. Do you?" Taking their cue from Oprah, the audience began booing. So she sort of whipped them up into this booing and then she said, "Okay, let him speak, please. Let him speak," she said. "Frey tried to defend what he'd done. I've struggled with the idea of it." And then Oprah cut him off. "No, the lie of it, that's a lie. It's not an idea, James. That's a lie." It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting. Wouldn't it have been good that in the Oprah Winfrey interview that if she had have said that to Meghan? Not the idea of it, Meghan. Not the idea of unconscious bias, Meghan. That's a lie. That's a lie. But she didn't say that to Meghan Markle or Prince Harry, and we now know that there was at least 17 distortions of truth throughout that interview, but evidently James Frey was the one who copped that accusation. So to wrap up the interview, they went to a break, and that was when James Frey asked, "Is there a gun backstage? Because if there is, I'll use it." And Frey said, with an understatement not shown in his writing, "This hasn't been a great day for me." I mean, she completely decimated the guy, completely decimated him. "But I think I've come out of it better." Yeah, said Oprah. Oh, gosh, he was generous. "I mean, I feel like I came here and I've been honest with you. I have, essentially admitted to," and Oprah jumps in there and goes, lying. Having been publicly flogged, Frey walked back to the green room as if in a coma. And then he said to one of his publicists, and this is a direct quote from the book, "Dude, I just got slaughtered by Oprah in front of 20 million people." So they all sat down in the green room. I presume that although he was an ex-addict, so he probably couldn't even have a drink to soothe his nerves in the green room after the show because he was sober and in recovery. But then a meth addict actually stood up in the after show and said, "I don't care whether the book's been exaggerated. It really helped me." And that's the thing. Thousands and thousands of people were really helped into recovery by this book. And so that can't be argued. And then Oprah said, "I'm glad it helped you," said Oprah. "That's why we have the book club. James has apologised, so I'm okay with it." But the thing is, that was edited out of the after show where she said, "I'm okay with it," and James has apologised. It was pretty much just said for the benefit of him back in the green room watching the after show, because it was chopped out before it went to air. So anyway, they finish the segment and Oprah comes into the green room and Frey and his publicist are sitting there just completely shell-shocked. And Oprah says, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I mean, it's a little bit too late, isn't it? And Frey says, "This sucks." And yeah, I think it did suck. And I mean, it took him many years to recover from that. So, you know, that's an insight into one of the major book scandals in the Oprah book with Kitty Kelley. The other major sort of imprint on me from the book was how she knows how to spend money. I mean, she has no shame in spending huge amounts of money and spending it really well. And she likes treating herself. I mean, you know, some people, if they garner great wealth, they never really know how to handle money. Well, she was very sensible with money. She was very businesslike about her money. She was wise. She protected herself. She invested wisely. But when it came to having a great time and spreading joy and having fun with it, she was an expert at it. Now, one of the people that benefited from that expertise in being generous with money was actually Maya Angelou. Now, I just love her so much and I really appreciate it. I love watching on YouTube those Super Soul Sundays she did with Maya Angelou. And one that completely resonates with me still is the one where she says, "Just do right." That there's there's right and there's wrong. You know what it is. In your soul, you know, just do right. And I love that. I always seek that for inspiration. I always look that up on YouTube because whenever you're in a moral dilemma or you don't know what to do, you know, I just love those words, just do right. Because, you know, if we're really honest with ourselves, most of the time we do know what's right and we do know what's wrong, but often we talk ourselves out of what's right for the sake of convenience. So I just love that saying. Anyway, end of lecture. But Maya Angelou was someone who really benefited from Oprah's love and also benefited from her generosity and her ability to throw a fantastic party. So one of the examples I'll give you about Maya Angelou's birthday parties that Oprah used to throw one every 5 years for her, a major party. And in this one in April 1998, she rented the Seabourn Pride, which is a huge ocean liner, for a week's cruise in the Caribbean, as you do. Invited 200 people and gave each a suite with a balcony on the luxury ship. She even had 2,000 yellow rubber duckies dropped into the ship's pool so we could play like children in a bathtub. And I mean, that's just amazing, isn't it? Now, 4 months before the event, they actually all received their invitations. And that she would ask in these invitations their shoe size, their shirt size, their pants size, their champagne preference, their favourite liqueurs, foods, cosmetics, fragrances, body lotions. And when they got into their suite, all the information they'd provided her would be evident in the suite because their favourite drinks would be there and their favourite, you know, PJs would be there and all these little touches and gifts all through the suites. She spent $4 million on that party. And he recalled that on the many stops the ship made, this is Vernon, her dad, that there was lavish lunches on white beaches, silk-lined tents for dinner, moonlit concerts with Nancy Wilson singing. Oh, I would just kill to be there. I just would. And she threw a similar bash for Maya when she turned 75 on Angelou's 80th birthday, where she rented Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach for the weekend. And for that one, there was actually performances by Michael Feinstein, Natalie Cole, and Tony Bennett. So, I don't know. I mean, it was interesting. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it. Like I said, it was a bit of a damp squib because by now, any scandal that we know about Oprah Winfrey has gone over a million times. It was interesting to read about the beef scandal where she had to go to Texas and fight that in court. It was interesting to see Dr. Phil's part in her winning that case, where he was the one that shifted sort of the focus on the case onto freedom of speech. And once he did that down in Texas, well, there's no way any jury down in good old Texas is going to vote against the First Amendment, are they? So that was why she was successful there. I believe it's available on Kindle if you want to grab it, if you can't find a secondhand copy like I did in a secondhand bookstore. But yes, I would, if you're interested in Oprah and all the nitty-gritty and delving behind the scenes, then you would probably enjoy Kitty Kelley's book, Oprah. And I'll be back to see you again very soon with another book very shortly. Bye. Bye.